hello everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for this discussion on what is the role of engineering managers in the hiring process. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Carrot. The webinar will last about 45 minutes, after which myself and the lovely panelists here will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the hiring channel. There will also be time to answer a few questions live. So please submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom. So towards the bottom of the screen, you should see a Q&A button, and that's where you can submit your questions. And again, we'll get to some of those towards the end. So we will start with a few introductions. My name is Allison McMillan. I will be your moderator today, and I'm an engineering leadership consultant. I'm joined by Jem Young, who is an engineering manager at Netflix, Dahlia Havens, the SVP of engineering at Replicated, and Scott Bono, who's the EVP of product and operations at Carrot. And we are here to share experiences and insights with you all. So the job market today. The job market today looks vastly different than how it looked a couple of years ago. And some of this is really beneficial for those of us who are actively hiring people and teams. And other aspects of these changes make the process of hiring much more difficult, right? Whereas a couple of years ago, maybe much of our time might have been focused on working with a talent professional, helping to drive the hiring process forward, or focusing on recruiting a pipeline of individuals from diverse backgrounds. These days, many of us are sort of in there reviewing hundreds of resumes and really helping to drive the process forward in a much more hands-on way. So today, we will dig into how we hire, our roles in the hiring process, and how we ensure that everybody's time is really well spent and used really well throughout the entire hiring process. So to kick us off, like I said, hiring is so different today. And even more than that, hiring looks very different at different companies, I think particularly for engineering roles. So would love to start off by just having everybody talk really briefly about how the hiring process works at your company, where you play an active role in that process, and who you work with throughout the process.
Great. Allison, I'll kick us off for this one. To share a bit, at Replicated, we're really fortunate our hiring managers do have a partnership with our people team, and we get support through the process in this way. For the process to get kicked off, one of the things that I really love is that we put together a hiring plan without going into all of the details. It does help us create a doc that we all work within. So we identify who are the folks on our side who are involved in the interview, what areas are we covering, what stages, how do we set up our call? And all of that translates to being very transparent with the candidate on timelines and expectations and how quickly we will turn around and give them feedback. There's a lot of investment that we do in the job description, making sure that we are very clear about our expectations, what we're looking for. Again, the purpose with all of that is to set everyone up for success through the process, and the candidate experience is super important. For us, hiring managers are the owners of the process. In that way, they are the DRIs, the directly responsible individual, for really staying very close to the candidates and our partners on the talent team. Again, all of that is to ensure that everyone has a great experience and we make the best hire. Also, our hiring process doesn't stop when someone joins. So onboarding them is what we still consider that part of the hiring, because setting these candidates for success is super important. I guess I'll turn it over to Jeff. Do you want to share a bit about what you do?
Yeah, thanks for taking it over. Kind of similar at Netflix. The hiring managers, the informed captain, the one who makes the final call. So how the hiring process works is totally up to the hiring manager. So they could say, we're going to do one round and I'm going to hire the person I like the most. That's totally up to them. The challenge there, of course, is who you hire is a direct reflection of you, and their success is a reflection of how strong your hiring is. So if they're not successful, there's only one person to point to. So generally, you don't make a one-round hire. You get as many informed opinions as possible. But at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with what people say. It's all just data points for me as a hiring manager. Uh, so along that process, I also work with the talent team. They do some of the sourcing, some of the administrative kind of background work that needs to be done. But we also put together a hiring plan where very similar to Dahlia, who's on the panel, what are the panels going to consist of, how long should they be, laying all that out in advance makes a much better hiring process than we need to hire who somebody, that doesn't help anybody. So I'd say the most important factor in our hiring process is the hiring manager being very thoughtful upfront before the process even starts about like, what do you need? What are you looking for? Because that's what the talent partners are going to look for in that first meeting. It's like, what are the skill sets? Why are you hiring? What's additive to your team? Uh, Remote or not? All these things you have to factor in before we even write a word of the JD. So yeah, I guess all in all, the last fiefdom of hiring it belongs to the hiring manager and the engineering manager, which is a pro and a con. It's a lot of work and many hours. I don't think people realize how many hours goes into one hire. But when you do it well, it's incredibly additive to the team. But Scott, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, so at Carrot we are an interviewing company. So Carrot helps some of the largest companies in the world with their technical screening and assessments. And so we very much eat our own dog food when it comes to our hiring process. So we have both an automated top of the funnel sort of computer adaptive test product that's really well designed for sort of high volume screening and leveling for candidates. So we put candidates through that. And then we actually take candidates through a live Carrot interview with one of our what we call interview engineers. Those are our folks that are specifically trained on technical interviewing and are qualified on the content that we develop. And that sort of it covers the early part of the hiring process. And then sounds actually quite similar, Jem, to what you described. Hiring managers have sort of the ultimate sort of say at the end of the process. But we do a lot of work at the beginning, to be clear about what the requirements for the role are, to make sure that we have, a rubric and a scoring methodology so that we can be very consistent across candidates. And obviously we do everything that we can to, mitigate bias in the process and make sure that we are giving folks from all different experiences an equal opportunity through the process as well. Yeah, and then at the end of the day, it is ultimately up to the hiring manager to make the final call. But as best we can at every step along the way, we try to be objective in the places where we reasonably can be objective, and then be clear about the places where we are making subjective decisions so that we can have all that captured. And then ideally, we can then, once someone has come on board, we can take a look at, 3, 6, 12, 18-month performance, and then make sure that we are selecting for the right things in the process for folks that are ultimately going to be successful once they're inside the organization.
Awesome. Thank you all. Yeah. So very similar processes, maybe slight differences here and there. I'm sure that if we got into the nitty gritty of like different rounds and how many rounds, those sorts of things, probably some things that are similar, some things that are different. So I'm assuming that we have all been through many hiring processes on sort of both sides, right? Both as hiring manager and as an applicant, as a candidate. I am curious to hear what does an ineffective hiring process look like to you?
I can take that. I've been on both sides of that. I've been guilty of not having the best hiring process. But these are lessons you learn as an engineering leader. What I've seen, at least as an engineering manager, an ineffective hiring process is not having a clear idea of what the role is going to be. So what are they going to work on? What are the skills you need? Should they be, like I mentioned before, should they be remote? Should they be hybrid? Does that matter? What does the team need? What is the business need? What are they going to be working on in the next 3, 4 years? Not having that laid out up front adds a lot of swirl for not only the sourcers who are trying to find qualified candidates, but to the people doing the interview panels, to even yourself when you're having these introductory conversations, and people say, what's your team about? What are you looking for in a role? And not having a really crisp, clear picture of like what you need makes the entire hiring process really, really painful. Because your team's going to ask like, hey, what should we do for a technical screen? What are we looking for? You'll be like, I don't know. Someone who's good at JavaScript. Not helpful. Not having a clear picture of like, what are the signals we need? Should they be someone who's really heads down and really technically focused on the code, or should they be more of a project leader, good at code and understands it, but we really need someone to be more of a PM engineer in this role. And there's a lot of different types of flavors of what you're looking for. And having all that together means you can have a really clear hiring process about like, we're going to do X, we're going to do X, we're going to do X, and then we're going to get to the end. So to me, the biggest sign of an ineffective hiring process is a really long one that's 4, 5, 6 months. And I've been guilty of that, not having a good picture. Not my best moment, but I learn every time. But that's usually a clear sign of like you don't know what you're looking for. But I'm curious, the other two of you, what's an ineffective hiring process? Maybe Delia.
Yeah, Jim, thanks. To add a bit to that, the hiring plan was really one of the changes that we made, and I liked it for that cohesive, organized plan. There are small things that end up happening through the interview process, and not staying close to the team, like finding out that everyone asked the same question. So like, wait, what happened? We're all supposed to get a chance to bring different perspectives, to have interesting conversations and so on. So really investing in that planning, investing in calibrating as a team, investing in the continuous feedback cycle. This is something we do. I think we all do it on projects, but bringing that same mentality to the hiring has also greatly improved the way that we're able to really be specific. And again, at the end, we do want to have a great candidate experience, and we want the folks who join to be the ones that are as perfect for the team and the role as possible. So definitely don't skip on the investment is some of the lessons that I've learned along the way as well.
Yeah, and what I would add to that, I strongly agree with both Dahlia and Jem on this. In particular, I would say the speed thing is really a big deal, right? Speed wins, right? There's even when it is even when there's an abundance of candidates out there, the best candidates are gonna they're gonna get snatched up. So speed is really important in the process. But I think the biggest thing that I would say, and I think it's consistent with what we heard from Dahlia and Jem, is you have to have a clear picture of what you are trying to learn about the candidate before you even talk to the person. In one of my first leadership roles, we had like a 5-point scoring system at the end of the interview, and people would kind of rate candidates on a 1 to 5 based on their interviews. And I sat through the first, several debriefs, and we were getting so many 3s that I eventually took it away. I was like, you can't give a 3. Like, your job is to go into this to form a perspective on whether or not we should hire this person. And if you don't have a clear perspective, then I'm going to answer for you. The answer is no. So we have to go in with that perspective. I would say a sign of an ineffective process is people not having a clear objective when they're talking to a candidate. I know that I am going in here to understand this person's, data structures and algorithms knowledge, and I'm going to assess that. Or I'm going in here to do a resume deep dive and understand how deeply they understand the things that they've worked on in their career. So that ultimately, at the end of the day, after everyone has talked to the candidate, we have all the information that we feel like we need in order to make a confident decision. And also, I feel like that if you can do that well, it has a positive side effect of a high likelihood of a positive candidate experience too, because you're not wasting their time. They're not answering the same things over and over again. Hopefully they're getting a chance to demonstrate the best of themselves in each one of those interactions. And they can feel like at the end of the process, they were given, a fair shake across however many, sort of interactions they had with interviewers.
Yeah, I will. I'm actually going to add to this one a little bit, sort of Scott, building on what you were saying about the candidate experience as well. One of the things that I think about when designing an interview process or hiring process is also in every round, we should know what we're learning about the candidate, but the candidate should also be learning about us, right? Because it's also as much their decision about whether we're the right company for them to join, about if they feel good about our company culture, et cetera. And so when thinking through each of those stages or each of those rounds, part of it is, okay, what are the questions we're asking? Who's involved in this round? Like what's the perspective that they're bringing? But also, who are we exposing the candidate to? What are we hoping the candidate learns about us, about our people, about our values, about our company through each of the rounds? So that's something that I usually think about as well. We've talked a little bit about this sort of in different ways, but wanted to sort of ask the question and see if there were more specifics we wanted to add. That's what is the most important thing to figure out before you post a new role? We've talked a little bit about like hiring plan and what you're looking for, but anything else that's like super important to figure out before you post a new role?
Yeah, I can start this one. I think the biggest thing for me is just clarity about what is going to be required for a person to be successful in that role, and then realistic in terms of what it is that you are asking for and putting into the job description, and similarly with the process. I think certainly a mistake that I made early in my career, and I would bet I'm not alone, was, I get to hire somebody. Let me go pull out my laundry list of all the amazing things that I want this person to do. And then it's like, well, the only person that could fit this bill is a leprechaun riding a unicorn over a rainbow. And you're like, well, that's not realistic. So being really crisp and clear about, hey, let's look at the people who are in this role now. What makes them successful? What are the skills and traits that they bring to the table? And what is it that we're going to look for, from candidates who we think we would want to see as being similarly successful, and then making sure that you've done that work up front, and then subsequently that you define your process appropriately, that you include the right people in the process along the way. But again, having that clear picture of like, if the best possible candidate for the role was the first person that you talk to, would you be able to confidently make a yes decision about after only seeing that one person? I like to think of it in terms like that.
Nice. Anyone else things to add about like most important thing to figure out before you post a new role?
Scott put it really well. I think all of that feeds into the job description that you end up writing. So the better you can articulate what the role is, how to be successful in it, what does the candidate need to bring, and what are you okay for them to learn. So like for us, we sometimes have very specialized skill set that we are looking for, and there are times when we assess the role, we want it to be very stage appropriate for the team. So some teams have more seniors and they're able to take someone with less experience and mentor them. Some teams really need that seniority. So factoring that in, but also allowing for, as Scott mentioned, like this is not a wish list of like, I want everything, because we all come with strength and areas that we will develop, and so are the candidates. So being clear on where you might invest. So for us as a company, this is super critical. Curiosity is one of our values. We put our money where our mouth is. So we have a curiosity budget that is very tailored to learning. And we do our best to make sure that's highlighted in the job description to say, we will invest in your learning in these areas, but these are the other skill set that we really need you to bring to the role. So that also helps create that transparency for everyone from the start, from the job description onward.
Yeah.
I'll add on basic logistics stuff. You need to figure out ahead of time, remote or in person. Like that's a big deal for everybody, but it's something it's easy to forget because you're like, oh, I need all these skills and here's how they're gonna grow and here's the projects they're gonna work on. But the really basic stuff, like, do you need to come to the office? What's the salary range? Netflix operates out of California, so by law we have to post salary range on all our job posts. But I think that's a good thing for most people because you don't waste anybody's time if the salary is not where they're at. Like that's really important up front. And kind of building on what Dahlia and Scott said, having the process ironed out before you post the role is really important. Otherwise, you post the JD and then there's a whole back and forth and swirl. Then, 3 months later, you're like, okay, I finally have the panel together versus just wait a little bit, have it all together. And that way the candidates aren't sitting waiting for a long time. And I think we've all been part of an application process that they're like, oh yeah, we'll get back to you in 8 weeks or so. And you're like, but I'm looking for a job today. So having all that ironed out ahead of time does make the process a little bit easier. And I will build on investing in the JD and like putting a lot of thought into it, putting many hours into it ahead of time makes the process easier because when you post the role, people are going to be like, hey, Talia, what about this and what about that? And you're like, oh yeah, I put that in the JD. I put that in the JD. Oh yeah, what technology is doing it? It's in the JD. What am I going to be working on? It's in the JD. Like that way, when you get to that first conversation, you can get immediately down to like the critical aspects you want to cover versus like the really basic, what technology is using, what projects am I working on, that sort of thing. So that's a lesson I've learned is just invest a lot in that, posting the job description and getting it, having people look at it ahead of time too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, JD, job description, in case that's not a common acronym for folks. Quick reminder, we do have the Q&A. So if you have questions, things that have come up, feel free to click the Q&A button and submit questions. So I just wanted to pop that in there sort of in between as we're discussing and asking questions. So Dahlia, you mentioned earlier sort of like the hiring plan and that was potentially a recent change. I'm curious for all of you, have you made any changes to your current process, especially given sort of changes in the market, that you feel like have been really helpful for you or for your team?
I'll kick us off if that's okay. Within that investment in the job description, I think one of the things that we got really good feedback from candidate, as Jen mentioned, like the detail, really be, invest in that description. We also specifically call out what you'll do the first 30, 60, and 90 day. And actually that exercise was tremendously helpful for the hiring managers as well. When you think about bringing someone on, you should be prepared to onboard them successfully. So it's sort of like an investment that continues to pay after you make the hire. But that was a really good one. The other is stressing the importance of being transparent. As hiring managers, for us, you are responsible for the hire. You invest a lot of time. You're expected to invest a lot of time. But sometimes you go into sell mode because you really want to close this candidate and you're excited about him. And all of that is great. But forgetting to be transparent about every element of the role, I tell people that I'm interviewing, especially for me, since I'm at a later stage, usually with the engineering roles, that I want them to ask as many questions to not be surprised. I do not want them to join and be surprised by anything. And I think remembering to be upfront with details, to really ask if there's any other information. They're not going to know everything to ask. So also being sort of a guide and coach to help them succeed through the process. This is not meant to be a trick. At least I tell people, like, I'm not here to trick you. I really, really want to make sure this is a great match for both of us, because that's what's going to make you successful, is going to make my team successful. So I would say like that focus was really critical for us. I don't know, Scott and Jem, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can touch on one thing, and this isn't not relevant to my role at Carrot, but at a prior employer, one of the things that we spotted in our data specifically for engineering hiring was that the time that the candidate was in process played a really dramatic effect on their likelihood to accept an offer at the end of the process. So there was basically a direct correlation between offer accept rate and time in process. So we put together a really aggressive plan to try to get everybody through the process in less than 30 days because we saw a really steep sort of fall off after that point. And as I think we probably all experienced, the most frustrating and also most expensive place to lose a candidate is after you've been through the interview process, you've decided that you want them to join, and then for whatever reason you aren't able to close the candidate. That, just that sort of insight of, hey, we have a dramatically stepped up offer acceptance rate if we can do it in this period of time, created a really good forcing function for us to focus on how efficient the process was up to that point, which had also then had a bunch of ancillary benefits as well, because we looked at areas of the process that were taking a long time. We started asking questions like, is this actually helping us make a better decision? Can we cut this part of the process out? Like we had a 90-minute like live coding exercise in the process at one point, and we looked at it and it was like only about 10% of candidates like that particular interview only had played a deciding role like 10% of the time, and we were like, is it worth this step if it only helps us 10% of the time? And the answer was no. And so I think things like that, and just it was a really good reminder that being very data oriented in your process and then being thoughtful about the insights that you can derive from that data can help you deliver a better process, which gives better outcomes both for you and can create a better candidate experience as well.
Those are great answers. I'm taking mental notes here. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I think a change that has been helpful is on the measure of like equality. So we want everybody, like when you come to the interview, we want you to show up your best possible self. Like Dolly said, it's not a trick. We're not trying to be like, aha, we got you. You didn't know this one weird fact about Python or something like that. We want you to show up as your best self. So we want to have empathy and structure the interview in a way that like you can show up prepared and you're like, I'm ready. I got this. I'm going to give you 100%, so we can assess you fairly. So one of those has been all interviews are now remote. There are people, even if the role is like, oh yeah, I can come into the office. We keep it remote to keep it fair for everybody. That's really important. It's like a really simple thing, but you want to remove bias as many parts as possible. Another change has been kind of to what Scott was talking about with like a 90-minute live coding exercise. We switched to a take-home exercise. So one, it does take a little bit more upfront time, which is, a pro and a con. However, it gives the candidate a better experience of coding in a natural environment, just like you normally would. You want to look things up on Stack Overflow? Sure. That's how you do it anyways. And then, so we moved a technical round. And then, so now the technical round we have is reviewing the coding exercise together, which is just like real life. And that's been like such a big change versus here's some leak code problems that you'll never actually do when you're coding here. Now it's reviewing a code just like you would with the team. And that's been super helpful. And we get a lot of candidate feedback saying like, that was actually one of the more enjoyable parts. I didn't get the role, but I enjoyed talking to the team and like explaining my thought process and everything. So I've always enjoyed that. And I'll say one last one that I found personally helpful, and this doesn't scale at all, is writing a note to people who did not get the role and just saying like, hey, sorry, it didn't work out, for whatever reason, and sending those all to the people that have applied to the role and closing them out. I've got so many thank you notes on that. They're like, thank you so much, Jim. No one ever tells me when I don't get the role. You just get dumped into the ignore pile. So just sending like, even if it's an automated email, just like, hey, sorry, it didn't work out this time. Try again soon or something like that is really helpful and builds up that long-term value and brand of your company of like, okay, this person actually does care about me in the process. That's one I wish everybody would do. If someone like you put them in the reject pile, send them an email and let them know. Don't let them hanging for like 2 months.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, we're talking about sort of differences in the hiring market. I think a couple of years ago, you mostly heard from everywhere that you applied. These days, it really like there's so much sort of like ghosting from companies of candidates. And I agree. I think it's really a shame. And I think that I think some companies don't realize the lasting impact of not sending, again, even if it's an automated email, to sort of let candidates know the lasting impact of what that sort of like up in the air question mark sort of feels like. I'm curious what has been the most challenging part of hiring these days compared to a few years ago.
I could take that one. The volume is the funnel at the top is much larger. Uh, I don't like saying this because some people get upset, but like the market has shifted back the other way towards employers when it was kind of the engineers market. That being said, if you're a talented engineer, you're still very much in demand and you still command a high salary. But uh, the volume of qualified candidates for a given role is immense these days. So filtering out like exactly what you're looking for, years of experience, whether that matters or not, specific things on the resume just takes a lot more effort because there's just a lot of really good people out there looking for new roles. So that's definitely been the most challenging part for hiring for my roles. But curious what the other two think.
Yeah, I literally would just give a +1 to that. I think that we've had this complete inversion from, about February of 2021, where it was completely wild and it was open season. If you were engineering, you had, if you were an engineer, you had so many options, to what the market has shifted to for the past, 15 or 18 months or so. And on the one hand, I think that can be a benefit as an employer. You can be really thoughtful and you're going to have access to a large number of candidates, but it does mean you have to deal with a significant amount of volume. And then I think it can also mean there can be quite a bit of pressure to make sure if you have a small number of roles that you've got available, that you are hiring the right people, which I think can lead you to unintentionally do some things that actually don't help you out. Like you can become overly cautious. You can drag your process out too long because you want to make sure that you're hiring the right person, but then you forget about candidate experience and so on and so forth. So I think certainly the whiplash effect from like the beginning of 2021 to the beginning of 2024 on that front has been difficult to navigate for a lot of people.
Yeah, great. So sort of building on that question, actually, when you know what attributes or characteristics you're looking for, where and how, like as a hiring manager, where and how do you find those? Where and how do you surface those through people who are applying, especially when we're dealing with this much higher volume of applicants?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I mean, I think one of the things that I think is really important but very difficult to do is, and it relates exactly to this top of the funnel challenge, I think, is how do you find people early in the process that you are going to want to make sure you spend your limited time, whether you're a recruiter or you're a hiring manager or whatever it is, because that really is the most constrained resource at the top of the funnel is the people who are sifting through applicants or who are doing the sourcing, that type of thing. And it's very easy, I think, to fall into the trap of resume screening for like, well, who are your two most recent employers or where did you go to school? And it's very easy to introduce pedigree bias into the process that way. It's very easy to miss very qualified candidates that come from non-traditional backgrounds. Maybe they went through a boot camp instead of a 4-year degree. And so one of the things that we've tried to focus a lot on at Carrot is how can we bring objectivity and candidate agency into the front end of the process? There are lots of different ways to go do this. There are great tools out there that let you do, sort of take home tests or like, coding assignments, those types of things. But then you do have to worry in that case too about, all right, well, if you're an engineer applying to a bunch of jobs and you have 5 different companies who all send you a 3-hour, take-home test to go do, you're probably not going to do all 5 of those. You're probably going to pick the 2 that you're most excited about. So how do you make sure you do that in a way that engages with candidates in a positive way? We built some technology that's aimed at doing that. That's sort of low energy, effort or time commit on behalf of the candidate. We call it Carrot Qualify. But the idea is give as much agency to the candidate at the front end of the funnel to show you what they know and what they can do, but in a way that doesn't require that your recruiters or your hiring managers are just talking to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of candidates, at the top of the funnel.
Anyone else on when you're sorting through all of those resumes or all of those applications, things you do to find those attributes or characteristics?
I mean, one of the things that we do, and I'm open to feedback on it, but we added some questions to our application. And again, it's not that you have to give a perfect answer, but it's to create that alignment on if there is a specific skill set we noted, and we want to encourage you to kind of take the time to answer some of these questions. I will say, just to be upfront and being, as a woman in engineering, I know one of the things that we don't want to do is discourage anyone from applying. So there's absolutely, like, one of the things that we now default to in our job description that we note, and we hope candidates read it, is to encourage everyone to not be hard on yourself. Please apply if you're interested. We are really happy to chat with you, but that could be one of the ways that you're able to augment your process and sort of create that alignment between what you're looking for and what skills the candidate brings to the table as well.
Yeah, and I'll add to that sometimes if a candidate feels like they don't check all of the boxes of, sort of like the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, or however the job description is defined, if you have one or two sort of application questions that really focus on, okay, these are really the things we're looking for, you can tell. It doesn't have to be a perfect answer, but you can tell a little bit more if there's a fit through a couple of those, not like 10, but 2, 3 sort of like application questions. You can see some of that in there. So sometimes it actually helps candidates that feel very passionate or very interested, but don't feel like they necessarily check 100% every single box to the fullest. All right. Before we move to some of the questions that have come in through Q&A, I wanted to ask, what is one piece of advice that you have for someone who's trying to make their hiring process more efficient and more effective right now?
I can take this one. Invest in clarity, and that's kind of what Scott and Dahlia and Allison, like we've all been talking about here, is making it clear for the candidate what you're looking for up front, making it clear for the interview panels about what you're looking for in each one. And if you do that by investing in the JD and investing in an efficient process that's well known by all parties, both the candidate and the people giving the interview, will make your hiring process much more efficient and makes that filter work down so that by the time they actually get to speaking to you or the team or things like that, it's not a waste of time for both sides. Like, it's a very clear alignment on, like, here's what the role is. I feel like I'm qualified for the interview panel. Here's what you're looking for from this particular person. So investing in clarity pays off dividends when it comes to the hours and hours it takes to hire somebody.
I'll plus one that. I think really remembering that you are the owner. As a hiring manager, you should be the expert on what your team needs, what is required for the role, and how you see yourself making this person successful on the team. And I know, like, as engineering managers, there's a lot of different responsibilities and everyone's coming at you, but that investment pays dividends and no one else can be the owner of that success. So I totally agree with Jem. It's super important to really invest in the process.
And yeah, plus one. I don't have anything specific to add beyond that. I really liked, Dahlia, what you were saying earlier about no one should be surprised by anything in the process. And Jem, I think you referred to that as well. Like, yeah, like, this isn't a gotcha. There shouldn't be trivia questions in here or brain teasers. The whole point is, this is what's expected of the role. Help us understand if you're capable of doing those things. And that really should be a conversation, not an interrogation, if you're doing it right. And that investment in being clear about that up front is going to create a better outcome for you. And by doing that, you're going to wind up creating a more welcoming environment for your candidate as well, because they're going to feel that in the process that you are invested in giving them an opportunity to show the best of themselves in your process. And that's going to help things like, offer accept rates and things like that as well, which can be really beneficial.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So now to some Q&A from participants. The first one, what do you do to onboard interviewers, and how do you make sure the interview process is consistent and fair?
I'll I'll take this one to start. Sorry, Scott, I saw you unmute. One of the things that I think pays dividends by investing in something like a hiring plan is that we're able to share that with candidates. Not the exact copy, but again, it's that notion that this is not a trick, this is not a gotcha. We want you to be prepared. We give you as much information. Sometimes we even include what each round is looking for so that candidates know what to expect. Think about, some of, the conversations you want to have, what questions you want to ask, and who are the people that you're going to be talking to. So giving them also an intro of the team, who's on the other side. So you get a chance to be prepared for those conversations, I think has been tremendously helpful. Okay, Scott, I'll turn it to you.
No, not at all. Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I think, right, like the way I think about interviewers in the hiring process is kind of the way I think about tires on your car, right? Like you can have a great engine, great suspension, all that stuff, but if your tires are bald, they're the only thing in contact with the road. Things can go sideways if everything else is great, but those aren't. Your interviewers are that for your candidates. So you really need to make sure that they are clear on what they like, the experience that they're trying to create for that candidate with what they're trying to cover, using that time efficiently and effectively. And also on, the more sort of, banal things like what can you and can you not ask about or talk about in an interview to make sure that you remain compliant and don't introduce unnecessary bias into the process and so on and so forth.
Yeah. All right. Next question. What are ways to identify good leads? So the team members that will delegate and drive the work to delivery. I'll repeat that one more time. What are ways to identify good leads? So team members that will delegate and drive the work to delivery.
Yeah, I can touch on this one. I think like I think the question is asking about how do you identify good like folks in leadership capacity, like folks that could be team leads. This is where I really love to do storytelling interviews. Tell me about a time when, and pose a question. Like a question I ask every single person in an engineering management role, for example, is tell me about a time when you had to let someone go. Like how did that work out? How did you determine that you needed to let that person go? What was the process? What happened when you gave the news? What happened afterwards? And what I have found really valuable about those is if you ask someone sort of an abstract question, they can give you a sort of a theoretical answer. But if you ask them to tell you a story about a thing that happened once, you will start to get an insight just by understanding what are the things that they chose to talk about, how did they talk about it. And then as you become more comfortable as an interviewer, you can kind of pick out spots where you want to, all right, well, that's an interesting nugget. I want to learn more about that particular part of the story. Can you expound on that for me? That type of thing. So for those types of more, leadership type skills or where people need to demonstrate their capability to be effective by working through others, nothing has worked better in my experience than storytelling and sort of, anecdotes. But curious to hear others' experiences.
I read this a little differently. I read it as the people doing the panel. You want leads to do the interview rounds because naturally you can't do them all yourself. And I could be reading it incorrectly. But for crafting your interview panel and people that are going to help drive that for each technical round, like Dahlia's been alluding to, having that interview plan ahead of time, saying like, hey, we want one take-home round, one technical round, and then putting people in charge of each, but also laying out the hiring rubric and saying like, hey, here's what we're looking for from these particular rounds. You go create a take-home interview that you can get a good signal given these qualifications, and then pulling everybody involved together, usually async because it's expensive to have a big meeting like that. But just saying like, hey, here's the panels, here's what we're looking for. Any feedback or input are welcome, but here's how we're going to start progressing. But we want to make this kind of a machine, essentially, of like taking in a candidate, giving them a good experience, and like trying to get what we need out of each round successfully. And that's been pretty effective for me in delegating that sort of work down. But you still have to have, as a hiring manager, have the overall picture about what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So today we have talked about all the things in hiring. We've chatted about hiring plans. We've talked about good and bad processes, candidate attributes, changes to the market. And we've also given a lot of different perspectives and ideas on hiring and how to make your process potentially more efficient or more effective for you and your teammates. So hopefully this helps you on your hiring path and gave you some great ideas about how you might want to change up your process or approach moving forward. We're going to take the rest of the Q&A questions to Slack, to the hiring channel. So thank you all so much, panelists, for the great insights. And again, we'll be heading over to Lead Dev Slack in the hiring channel to continue the conversation. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and see you next time.